The backstage area of Studio 8H at Rockefeller Center fell silent. It was February 18th, 1978, and Saturday Night Live was about to witness one of the most infamous confrontations in television history. Bill Murray, the show's rising star, stood face to face with Chevy Chase, the golden boy who'd left the show just 2 years earlier. What started as tension quickly escalated into something nobody expected. Two comedy legends nearly coming to blows before John Belushi had to physically separate them. But this wasn't just a simple backstage scuffle. This was the explosion of resentment that had been building for years, and it would define both men's careers in ways neither could have imagined. For decades, people wondered what really happened that night. What could make two of America's funniest men want to destroy each other? The answer is more complicated and darker than anyone realized. And now, after over 4 decades of speculation, Bill Murray has finally broken his silence about why he truly hated Chevy Chase. The real story goes far deeper than a simple ego clash. It reveals a pattern of behavior that would haunt Chase throughout his entire career and ultimately cost him everything he'd worked for. In 1975, Chevy Chase wasn't just funny, he was revolutionary. When Saturday Night Live premiered that October, Chase became an instant sensation. His Weekend Update anchor persona, with that signature opening line, "I'm Chevy Chase and you're not," made him the show's breakout star almost overnight. Within months, he was on magazine covers, doing talk shows, and becoming the face of a cultural phenomenon. But here's what most people don't know. Even then, cracks were forming. Behind the scenes at SNL, Chase's behavior was already raising eyebrows. While the original not ready for primetime players were supposed to be an ensemble, Chase made it clear he saw himself differently. He wasn't part of the group, he was the star, and everyone else was supporting cast. Lorne Michaels, the show's creator, later admitted in interviews that managing Chevy's ego became a full-time job. "He needed constant reassurance," Michaels said. "But the moment you gave it to him, he'd use it as ammunition to remind everyone else how important he was." Dan Aykroyd, one of the original cast members, was more blunt. "Chevy was talented, no question. But he made you pay for every laugh he got. He needed you to know he was better than you." By the end of the first season, Chase had already decided to leave. NBC offered him everything: more money, creative control, top billing. But Chase had bigger plans. Hollywood was calling, and he wasn't about to let Saturday Night Live hold him back from movie stardom. In November 1976, just 14 months into SNL's run, Chevy Chase walked away. And that's when Bill Murray walked in. Bill Murray didn't want to be Chevy Chase's replacement. He'd been doing improv comedy at Second City in Chicago, building his own reputation as a brilliant performer with a completely different style. Where Chase was slick and confident, Murray was loose and unpredictable. Where Chase played the handsome everyman, Murray embraced the weird and awkward. But that didn't matter to anyone else. The media immediately framed Murray's hiring as the new Chevy Chase. Every article, every interview, every introduction started the same way. Replacing the irreplaceable Chevy Chase is Bill Murray. Murray hated it. In a rare 1999 interview with Howard Stern, Murray finally opened up about those early days. "I wasn't trying to be Chevy, I was trying to be me. But everywhere I went, people wanted to know why I wasn't more like him. It was like being asked why you're not more like your older brother, who everyone thinks is perfect. The comparison wasn't just annoying, it was professionally damaging." Murray had to work twice as hard to establish his own identity, to prove he wasn't just a cheaper version of someone else. And every time he succeeded, every time he got a laugh, or created a memorable character, the press would write about how he was finally stepping out of Chevy Chase's shadow. Meanwhile, Chase's movie career was exploding. Foul Play with Goldie Hawn was a hit. Caddyshack was about to make him a comedy icon. He was everywhere, and his success was held up as proof that leaving SNL had been the right decision, that the show needed him more than he needed it. For Murray, stuck in Chase's old job, doing Chase's old segment on Weekend Update, the constant comparisons became unbearable. He started making jokes about it on air, little digs that the audience thought were funny, but were actually Murray's way of dealing with genuine frustration. Then came the night everything exploded. The fight that changed everything. When Chevy Chase returned to host Saturday Night Live on February 18, 1978, everyone knew there would be tension. Chase had left the show as its biggest star, and Murray had become SNL's new anchor. The two had barely spoken since Chase's departure, and what little interaction they'd had was strained. But nobody expected what actually happened. According to multiple witnesses, including John Belushi and Lorne Michaels, the confrontation started in Chase's dressing room about an hour before showtime. Murray had gone to say hello, attempting to be professional despite their history. What happened next has been recounted by so many people that the basic facts are undeniable, even if the exact words vary depending on who's telling the story. Chase, according to Murray's later accounts, immediately made it personal. He started criticizing Murray's performance on the show, suggesting that the ratings had dropped since he'd left, implying that Murray wasn't funny enough to fill his shoes. Murray, who'd been bottling up frustration for over a year, fired back, and this is where things get truly ugly. What Murray said next, and what Chase said in response, has been reported in various forms over the years. But in 2018, Murray finally confirmed the basics in an interview with Empire magazine. I told him exactly what I thought of him. I told him he wasn't funny anymore, that he'd become lazy, that his movies were getting worse. I told him he was a hack who got lucky. Chase's response was worse. According to multiple sources, Chase made disparaging comments about Murray's appearance, his personal life, and his talent. The exchange became so heated that voices were raised, and the insults turned into something more physical. Jane Curtin, who witnessed the aftermath, later said, "They were screaming at each other. Really screaming. And then they started pushing, and if John hadn't stepped in, I think they would have actually fought." John Belushi, who was close friends with both men, physically separated them. Other cast members rushed in. The show was about to start in less than an hour, and the host and one of the main cast members had almost come to blows. The show went on. Somehow, professionals that they were, both men delivered their performances. But backstage, the damage was permanent. They didn't speak to each other for the rest of the night. They haven't had a real conversation since. For over 40 years, whenever asked about the incident, Bill Murray gave variations of the same answer. Chevy and I had creative differences. Sometimes he'd make a joke about it, deflect with humor, or simply refuse to discuss it. But he never explained what really drove his hatred of Chase, until now. In recent interviews conducted for various retrospectives about SNL's history, Murray has started opening up about the deeper issue, and it's not what people expected. "The thing about Chevy that bothered me wasn't his ego," Murray explained in a 2023 interview. "Lots of people in comedy have egos. That comes with the territory. What bothered me was how he treated other people when the cameras weren't on." Murray went on to describe a pattern he'd observed both during Chase's time at SNL and after. Chase would be charming, funny, and generous when it served his purposes, but could turn cruel and dismissive to people he considered beneath him. "I watched him reduce a production assistant to tears once because his coffee wasn't hot enough," Murray said. Not as a bit. Not as a joke. He genuinely berated this kid who was just trying to do his job, and the moment a producer walked by, Chevy was all smiles again, like nothing had happened. This behavior wasn't isolated. Over the years, similar stories have emerged from dozens of people who worked with Chase. And while Murray's personal feud with Chase might have started over professional jealousy and comparison, what transformed it into genuine hatred was what Murray saw as Chase's lack of basic human decency. "You can be a star," Murray said. "You can even be difficult. But you don't get to make people feel worthless because you're having a bad day. That's not being an artist. That's just being an asshole." As Chevy Chase's film career continued through the 1980s and into the 1990s, more stories began to surface. Co-stars would mention his difficult behavior in interviews, usually framed as Chevy being Chevy, or method acting taken too far. But the pattern was undeniable. On the set of Fletch, sources reported that Chase would often ignore his co-stars between takes, refusing to rehearse or run lines. On Nothing But Trouble, Dan Aykroyd, his old SNL colleague, later admitted that working with Chase again was a mistake. "The Chevy I knew in the 70s was gone. This was someone who seemed angry all the time." By the time Chase joined the cast of Community in 2009, his reputation preceded him. Creator Dan Harmon knew about the stories, but believed Chase's talent was worth the risk. That decision would lead to one of the most controversial incidents in modern television, the Community disaster. In 2012, During the filming of Community's third season, an incident occurred that would finally expose the full extent of Chase's behavioral problems to a new generation. The details are disturbing and reveal exactly why Bill Murray's decades-old hatred was justified. According to director Jay Chandrasekhar and multiple cast members, Chase became angry during a table read about a storyline involving his character, Pierce Hawthorne. The discussion turned to dialogue, and Chase, frustrated with what he perceived as his character being portrayed as racist, used the N-word in front of the entire cast and crew. Yvette Nicole Brown, one of the show's African-American cast members, was horrified. She immediately left the scene. Production was halted. Cast members demanded an apology. Chandrasekhar later described what happened next. Chevy had a full meltdown. He believed his career was over, that he was being cancelled before that was even a term we used. But even in his panic, he couldn't seem to understand why what he'd said was so wrong. The incident required intervention from NBC executives. Chase eventually apologized, but the damage was done. His relationships with the cast never recovered, and by the end of season 4, Chase left the show under circumstances that were clearly not amicable. Donald Glover, who worked closely with Chase on Community, later said, "I learned a lot from Chevy, most of it what not to do. He was talented, but he made being around him exhausting. Eventually, talent isn't enough to make up for that." But even the Community incident wasn't the full story. In recent years, as part of Saturday Night Live's 50th anniversary retrospectives, more details about Chase's behavior during his original run have emerged, including allegations that are genuinely shocking. Terry Sweeney, who in 1985 became SNL's first openly gay cast member, has alleged that during a pitch meeting, Chevy Chase suggested a sketch where Sweeney would play a character dying of AIDS. The suggestion was presented as comedy, but Sweeney described it as deeply homophobic and humiliating. In the recent CNN documentary, I'm Chevy Chase and You're Not, this incident is addressed. Chase disputes parts of Sweeney's account, but multiple people who were present have corroborated the basic facts. The sketch was never performed, but the suggestion alone created a hostile environment. What's particularly revealing is Chase's response when confronted about these incidents decades later. Rather than offering genuine remorse, Chase often frames them as misunderstandings or products of a different time. Responses that suggest he still doesn't fully grasp why his behavior was wrong. For Bill Murray, these revelations have been a strange form of vindication. For 40 years, people wondered if his feud with Chase was petty, two egos colliding in a moment of stress. But as more stories emerged, as more people came forward, the pattern Murray recognized back in 1978 became undeniable. "I'm not happy that I was right about Chevy," Murray said in 2024. "I wish I'd been wrong. I wish he'd been the guy he seemed to be on camera, but he wasn't. And what bothers me most is how long it took for everyone else to see it." Murray has been careful not to pile on as Chase's reputation has deteriorated. When asked directly about Chase's controversies, Murray typically deflects, saying he doesn't want to kick someone when they're down. But he also doesn't defend Chase or minimize what happened. "The truth is," Murray explained, "Chevy had everything. Talent, looks, opportunities that most people never get. And he squandered it by treating people badly. That's not a tragedy. That's a choice." The documentary Confessions. In March 2025, CNN released I'm Chevy Chase and You're Not, a documentary that promised unprecedented access to Chase's life and thoughts. For many, it was an opportunity for Chase to finally take responsibility, to explain his behavior, and perhaps to make amends. What viewers got instead was complicated and, in many ways, heartbreaking. Chase revealed experiences of childhood abuse that clearly shaped his personality and approach to relationships. He discussed serious health struggles, including heart failure and memory issues following a coma. He appeared genuinely fragile and at times confused, particularly when asked about specific incidents he claimed not to remember. But even as Chase shared these vulnerabilities, he struggled to take full accountability. When confronted about the Community incident, he acknowledged using the N-word, but framed it as being caught up in a moment, rather than as a reflection of deeper problems. When asked about Terry Sweeney's allegations, he disputed details rather than addressing the fundamental issue. The documentary revealed a man grappling with the consequences of his actions, but not quite capable of fully understanding or accepting responsibility for them. Some viewers felt sympathy. Others saw it as further proof that Chase still doesn't get it. Bill Murray, who was asked to participate in the documentary but declined, later commented, "I hope Chevy finds peace. I really do." But finding peace doesn't mean escaping consequences. Sometimes the way people remember you is the consequence. Perhaps the most painful moment in Chase's recent troubles came with Saturday Night Live's 50th anniversary special in February 2025. Chase, as an original cast member and the show's first breakout star, expected to be prominently featured. Instead, he was barely acknowledged. Chase wasn't invited to present any segments. He wasn't featured in retrospectives. His Weekend Update segments, once considered groundbreaking, were largely overlooked in favor of later anchors. For a man who helped create the template for modern comedy television, the exclusion was devastating. Chase publicly stated that the snub hurt him personally. He gave interviews criticizing the show, calling recent seasons the worst humor in the world, and suggesting that SNL had abandoned true comedy. But these criticisms only reinforced the narrative that Chase couldn't let go of past glory or accept how his own behavior had contributed to his exile. Lorne Michaels, when asked about Chase's exclusion, was diplomatic but clear. "We celebrate the work, and Chevy's early work was important. But we also have to consider the full picture of someone's legacy." For Murray, who did appear in the special and received a standing ovation, the contrast was striking. Both men started at the same place. Both were immensely talented, but their paths diverged entirely based on how they treated the people around them. The story of Bill Murray and Chevy Chase isn't really about a backstage fight in 1978. It's about something much more fundamental: how talent alone isn't enough, and how the way you treat people ultimately defines your legacy. Murray recognized early what many others took decades to see: that Chase's cruelty wasn't an aberration, but a pattern. That his charm was superficial, and his success was built on a foundation that couldn't last because it required burning bridges and leaving casualties. In a recent interview, Murray reflected on what he's learned from the experience. "I spent years being angry at Chevy, but eventually I realized that being angry at him was like being angry at a scorpion for stinging. It's just what they do. The real lesson was about choosing who you want to become." Murray chose differently. He built a career on being unpredictable but fundamentally kind. He's known for showing up unannounced at parties, buying strangers drinks, and treating crew members with the same respect as studio executives. His reputation for being difficult occasionally surfaces, but it's always about creative choices, never about cruelty. Chase chose a different path. And now, in his late 70s, dealing with health issues and professional exile, he's facing the consequences of those choices. In early 2025, a reporter asked Bill Murray one last time, "Do you hate Chevy Chase?" Murray thought for a long moment before answering, "No, I don't hate him. I never really did. I hated what he represented, the idea that you could be cruel and get away with it because you're talented. I hated that he made people feel small. But the man himself? He's living with the consequences of his choices now. That's punishment enough." But then Murray added something that cuts to the heart of the whole story. "What I hope people learn from this is simple. Your talent might open doors, but it's how you treat people that determines whether those doors stay open." Chevy had a chance to be remembered as one of the greatest. Instead, he'll be remembered as a cautionary tale. And that's sadder than any insult I could ever throw at him. The feud between Bill Murray and Chevy Chase isn't just Hollywood gossip. It's a story about character, consequences, and the long shadow that our choices cast. Chase had everything: talent, opportunity, success. But he squandered it by treating people as obstacles rather than fellow human beings. Murray saw it early. He called it out. And 47 years later, he's been proven devastatingly right. The question isn't why Bill Murray hated Chevy Chase. The question is why it took everyone else so long to understand that his hatred was justified. But what do you think? Was Murray justified in his decades-long grudge? Or should he have been more forgiving? Do you believe Chevy Chase deserves a second chance? Or has he burned too many bridges? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you found this story as shocking as I did, smash that like button and subscribe so you never miss our deep dives into Hollywood's darkest secrets. And speaking of comedy legends with complicated pasts, click on the video appearing on your screen right now. What really happened to Rick Harrison from Pawn Stars? Another story of fame, family drama, and the price of success that you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.